the greatest miracle I can imagine is the appearance of a god to a soldier.
Very good.
And then says, now pay attention, soldier. Do what I tell you, and you'll see something really great. And then he helps that soldier named Arjuna so transform his consciousness that he sees God directly. That's an ultimate miracle. When Jesus took Peter and James and John, excuse me, Peter and James and John up to a high hill, which may be a real hill or a spiritual hill,
Yes.
and said, now I'm going to give you a miracle. They had a similar experience, though they also were just sort of dazzled by it and weren't able to speak about it very well. Whereas in the Bhagavad Gita, whoever is the source of this, or the transmitter, I should say, of this revelation, does give amazing details about this God, Krishna, in his ultimate divine state. So these people around Jesus, to my mind, were a lot like Arjuna. They were pretty klutzy starting out. You know, they just really weren't that impressive. And they were depressed often about, what about me? What about me? Well, you know, how's that going to work? And you know, I'm trying to do fishing, and what kind of an idea is this, and whatever. And slowly, Jesus brings them to the point where they were able to see not only what he was saying or what he was doing, but even more, what he was, what he is. That's how Arjuna experienced Krishna. He was able to say, so you really are the God that includes all the gods. And the followers of Jesus were able to say, whoa, you really are the human being who is also a divine being. Whoa. But they didn't really get that very clear until the resurrection, and then until the coming of the Spirit, which Christ said, I will send the Spirit, and he will guide you. And that's the beginning, in a certain sense, of their chapter 10 and 11. Right? That's when they come to be Christ beings, the way Arjuna became a Krishna being. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, they had to be, so starting out, Arjuna looks like pretty hopeless. I mean, he's like a candidate for therapy, as you were saying, I think very wonderfully, Prasad. And so Krishna turns out to be this great therapist, but he also turns out to be more than a therapist. He's the ultimate therapist of the whole of humanity. But in a certain sense, this is misleading, because in 45 pages, Arjuna comes a long way. So he must have had a pretty good karmic head start, all right? And I think about these fishermen around Jesus, and I say, what a crew to work with. I mean, my goodness, they're just hopeless. But they must have had something going for them, because in the course of 3 years, and then some extraordinary events at the end of those 3 years, several in particular, a crucifixion, a resurrection, and then this experience of the Spirit at Pentecost, they had some karmic capacity to receive this grace from Christ and become entirely different beings, very like, the way I think of it at least, Arjuna becoming a different being when he goes into battle. So is that the kind of parallel you
yeah, it is. I mean, I think there is a lot more yet to come, one of which is, you know, during Christ's time, Christ started this because he saw a lot of misconduct going on within the temple, right? And he wanted to straighten that out. So there was human misconduct happening within Israel, within that area being ruled by the Romans at that time. Is that true?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So likewise, Krishna was trying to straighten up the misconduct happening between two sets of cousins. One of the cousins conducting misconduct over the other. Likewise, Christ was born to straighten the world out, which is what the Gita says. Every so often, I'm going to come forth to straighten the world out that is under misconduct, what is the word, under the unrighteous conditions. Adharma. So I really believe there is that parallel exists.
It's a good parallel. But I'd like to say that the parallel has both a very, very simple local level, but then, as you said, straighten out not just the Civil War or not just what's going on in the temple, but straighten out humanity.
Yes.
So the temple might have been fine, and Jesus would have come anyway. And the Civil War wasn't Christians' concern, because after all, at the end, he says, so therefore go and fight.
Yes.
So that's not their focus. I believe that these two figures, along with Buddha, are these three huge transformers of the whole of humanity. Now, they do have a local place where they step down. All right. Now, whether Krishna was a human, in a physical body is not so clear, but he did come into a certain time, into a certain situation, though with implications for the whole of humanity. And Jesus, was born of this young Jewish woman, all right, in a very mysterious circumstance, and poor, and then becomes the teacher who looks at first as though he's a local person, is a person without education with these ragtag followers. But then, through the resurrection, through the Holy Spirit, through the influence of the whole Western world, it seems, if all this is intended, right, that Christ didn't come to fix up the temple. He came to lift the whole of humanity. Yes. So there's some amount of Christ in every human being, just as Krishna says, I am in you and you are in me. So there's some amount of Krishna, not only in Arjuna, but Arjuna is the whole of humanity, yes, or represents the whole, as you were saying before, every man. So he represents, so now Krishna is throughout humanity, and Buddha is throughout humanity, and Christ is throughout humanity. These are figures. In the Indian tradition, they're called avatars, but Buddhists don't use that term. But the Mahayana Buddhists say that in addition to Gautama, who is a man, there is this reality, Buddha, or Buddha nature, or Buddhahood, and there are even three bodies of Buddha, two of which are completely spiritual. And so in addition to Jesus, who was born and taught and made miracles and suffered, executed, and then it's Christ that resurrects. So it's not Jesus, the historical man, but it's Christ, this divine being, who then stays with humanity. So this is a very beautiful teaching, I think quite similar, not to chapters 2 and 3 of the Gita, but to chapters 9, 10, and 11. And after we get to 9, 10, and 11, then we go back to chapter 2, and we say, that's what Krishna was talking about. This doing of my duty, Prasad studying chemistry, is part of a whole cosmos that Krishna is holding.